Good morning, everyone. This is Dan, and this is the Napkin Academy, and I want to welcome you to a new lesson. Today, we're going to be talking about the 6x6 rule revisited. The simple idea is we can present any idea with just 6 pictures, and the way we're going to talk about those pictures is putting them into kind of a pizza pie, and we're going to go around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we will communicate anything with just our 6 simple pictures. As we all know, the 3 rules of making extraordinary presentations: tell the truth, lead with the truth, and the heart will follow. Rule number 2, tell it with a story, lead with a story, and understanding will follow. Well, today we're going to go into details around rule number 3. And what was rule number 3? Well, that's the one I love. Tell the story with pictures. The idea being, if we want to make an extraordinary presentation, we tell the truth, we tell the story, and we tell that story with pictures. Why is that? Because if we lead with the eye, the entire mind will follow. Why is that? Well, as we know, it has to do a little bit with how vision works. We talked about this in great detail on the last session, so we'll just go over it very, very quickly. Vision, this amazing, miraculous process that allows us to see the world that's outside of us, go through our eye, go through our brain, and see that world in our own mind so that it makes sense. Amazing. How does that work? Well, we know that vision is in fact 6 discrete processes, 6 different pathways. One of those which looks at the whats of the world, the physical objects. One of them which counts. One of those pathways which looks for position. One of those pathways which looks for relationship in time. One of those pathways that tries to make sense out of the cause and effect that we're seeing, and then all of those get added up and we come up with the big why. Cognition, visual thinking, all thinking. So if we were to take that neurobiological set of lessons and begin to turn them into pictures, what we would find is that the 6 ways that we look at the world map very nicely to the 6 pictures that we draw to explain the world. We're going to go through these 6 in great detail for the rest of the time that we have. So before we do, I thought it would be interesting to think about things that come in 6. What are some of the things out there in the world that come in groups of 6, aside from vision? Well, the first thing we need to understand is that 6 is quite literally a perfect number. And it's the first perfect number, and here's the formula that proves that. Now, all we want to say when we talk about something being a perfect number is it means that the number is equal to the sum of its divisors excluding itself. That means 6 equals 1 plus 2 plus 3, which are all divisors that can go into 6. After 6, the next number that has this sort of perfect property is the number 28, then on to 496, 8,128, and then we get up to a number that's so big I can't even count it. So 6 tends to be a neglected number, but it shouldn't, because it is our perfect number. What are some of the things that come in 6s? Well, clearly, soda comes in a 6-pack, perfect number of sodas. Eggs come in a half dozen, 6, perfect number of eggs. Ah, nice. If you ever order cupcakes, they come by the half dozen. I think I could use a cupcake right now. What a great thing for breakfast. They come by the half dozen. What are other things that come in 6s? Well, strings on a guitar. They come in a series of 6. Make a lot of music out of just those 6 strings. Uh-oh. There are only 6 birds in Angry Birds. That entire game is based on just 6 little birds. One of them, of course, is a pig, but we're not going to worry about that. 6. What are some other things that come in 6s? Well, 6 sides on a die. Why might that be? Because something else that comes in 6s are the dimensions of Newtonian space. So every time we draw a cube, we're actually illustrating the fact that there are 6 dimensions. Now we'd think that there's 3, the x dimension, the y dimension, and the z dimension, but we'd be right. But we'd remember also that Newton told us that those dimensions go in vectors in 2 different directions. So in fact what we have is, in order to make a cube of 3-dimensional space, it has 6 different planes that make it up. So in fact, anytime we think about 3 dimensions, we're actually using a 6x6 model right from the beginning. Other things that come in 6s, well, the legs of an insect, of course. Perfect number if you're going to be very stable. What are other things that come in 6s? The number of carbon atoms in one of the most amazing molecules ever. This is benzene. And benzene, of course, is an amazing, miraculous molecule. Benzene is what happens when you take 6 carbons, they bond together just like this, and they become a very, very potent ring. And that ring bonds with other types of chemicals and makes fascinating things. All petroleum products are based on that ring of 6 carbon atoms. All plastic products are based on that ring of 6 items. And bananas are not, but the smell, the lovely smell of bananas wafting off, the smell of bananas can be made artificially, and I did this in the lab once, by making a benzene ring and then adding some interesting things to it. So things that come in 6s. 6s are a really good building block for the world around us. And most importantly, the things that come in 6s, well, 6 slices of a pie. And again, we come back to food. It must be breakfast time here in San Francisco. What other pie do we have? Well, the pie of how we think breaks down into 6 slices, doesn't it? The 6-mode model of thinking is a mode model that's been around for a long time that says when we think about any idea at all, one way of imagining how we cogitate on it is our mind actually breaks that idea up into 6 discrete different types of information. Who and what, how much, where, when, how, and why. And if we combine all 6 of those slices, we have the complete idea. Which brings us back to the 6 pictures we're going to talk about. Because here's the thing that I think is fascinating. If we believe anything that I've said to you so far, and I'll tell you I believe all of it, in order to illustrate any story, we only need to create 6 pictures. One picture that shows the who and the what, one picture that shows how much, one picture that shows where those things are, one picture that shows when those things are, one picture that shows how they interact, and one picture that summarizes why. If we draw those 6 pictures, we can draw anything. Which tells us, are those pictures hard to draw? They are not. Because if we just start out with the very simple basics, we will find that our picture of who and what becomes a little portrait. Our picture of how much gives us a chart. Our picture of where gives us a map. Our picture of when gives us a timeline. Our picture of how gives us a flowchart. And our picture of why gives us something we're going to call a visual equation. Well, what does that mean? Well, for those of you that have been through lesson number 2 with me in Show and Tell, rule number 2, we tell our ideas with a story. We will remember that there were 4 basic storylines. There was the report, there was the explanation, there is the pitch, and there was the drama. So here's where all of this comes together. We bring all 4 of those storylines to life by simply combining sets of our 6 pictures. To bring any of the 4 storylines to life, all we have to do is pick a few of these pictures and put them in the right order. So let's spend the rest of this session talking about these 6 pictures, giving examples, and thinking about the order that we'd put them in. Well, the first question we might ask is, okay, look, I've written a presentation, or I've written my story, and now I want to present it. But how would I turn that into pictures? And this is where our pie comes back into play. To add pictures to our story, we use this picture pie to simply translate what we would say. I might say Bill, or I might say Mary. What I would say 10. What I say here. When, then, how, like this, because, why, because I said so. Whenever I would say one of those things, I simply look at this pizza pie and I say, well, instead of saying it, what would happen if I drew a picture of it? And that shows us. When I'm talking about who and what, I draw a portrait. When I'm talking about how much, I draw a chart. When I'm talking about where, I draw my map. When, I draw my timeline. How, I draw my flowchart. And why, I draw my equation. I would really like to emphasize how absolutely simple this process is. In order to convey anything in a presentation, we only need to create 6 drawings, and we create those drawings based on the things that we want to say in our presentation. It's the simplest thing in the world. And the sequence of our pictures does matter when we begin to present. Typically, we're going to work our way all the way around this pizza pie, drawing all 6 of the pictures, but typically for a presentation, we want to start either with the portrait up here at the top and then work our way around, or we want to start with the equation and work our way around. I like to start with this picture, and that leaves the equation, which is the big Y picture, for the end of the presentation. That's the big payoff. That's kind of the moral of the story. However, there are many instances where people are not sure why we're even there giving them a presentation. If that's the case, it's beneficial to start with the equation. Here's why I'm here, and let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll go through the others. So, very theoretical. I think that it's time to go ahead and move from the models and move directly into the pictures. So let's take a look, and we'll start at the top of our pizza pie with our portraits. So we looked at some of these last time quickly. Let's just look at a handful of different portraits. When I talk about a portrait, what do I mean? I mean the simplest possible picture we can make that reflects a thing, a person, or an object. And here's a series of portraits, some famous, some not so famous, some very elaborate, some very simple, that are just something that show us our mind loves to look at portraits. We love to look at other people, whether photographs or drawings, and they conjure up all kinds of ideas for us. So portraits, when we want to do a presentation, when would we use a portrait, a photo of a person, or a drawing of a person, or a drawing of an object? Well, whenever we're interested in showing who and what. And our portraits might be as simple as showing a basketball or a particular person, or comparing two physical objects, or showing one house in relation to another, or maybe perhaps showing that there are visual differences between someone who's happy and someone who's unhappy. But we've talked about these before, but let's talk about in a presentation, when would I use a portrait? And I'm going to go with more text on my slides now than I typically show, because I'm going to ask you that come back to this recording as you're working on your presentations and flip through these, because I think these rules about when we use the different type of pictures can be quite useful for us. We draw or include a portrait in our presentation whenever we introduce a new character, a new group, or a new object. A new person I want to share with you, a new idea, a new object I want to introduce to you. We draw a portrait. Then we show that portrait again whenever that character appears again, especially in a different context. For example, let's say I told you that John is a very important person in my presentation. There's John. And then later on I'm going to draw some kind of a map. If I include John again, you're going to remember because you've already seen his portrait. And I don't have to teach you how to read the map now because you're already used to looking at the portraits that are contained within it. Or I use a portrait when it is very important to make sure that each person or object is distinct from all the others. Listen, if I'm going to give you a presentation and it is about these 6 things and they're all identical, I only need to make one portrait. But if those 6 things are different, then showing that with a portrait is important. So that's enough about portraits. Let's talk about picture type number 2, working our way around the pie, which was a chart. Charts are what we use, of course, when we want to talk about the number of things. How many of them are there? I introduced some characters a moment ago. Now let's count them. So charts might show things about how much chocolate is involved, a nice pie chart of some sort, a line chart, another line chart. Ironically, this one, how many legs does the cuteness have? And according to this chart, having 6 legs like our little ladybug does not make it very cute. 6 is not good. So that's charts. Charts, again, show how much. Pie charts, bubble charts, bar charts, thermometer charts, histogram time series. Great, lots of charts. During a presentation, when should we use a chart? Very different from when we used a portrait. Whenever we introduce a measurement, a quantitative comparison, this versus that, or a set of numeric data, that's when we add a chart. When it is important that our audience sees a measurable change or trend, we use a chart. When we have quantitative evidence that we want to share, I've got a table and it's full of data. Okay, rather than show you the table, it might be more beneficial to show you the chart version so that's more visually understandable. And frankly, whenever we want to clarify or diffuse an argument which is becoming very emotional, lots of passion coming into the argument, it's often very useful to say, okay, hey, can we go back to the numbers for a moment? So that's when we would use a chart. Moving on, picture type number 3, we're going to talk about our maps. Maps are the type of pictures we show that show the spatial relationship of things. Here's where countries are on Earth. Here's where the coldness is coming in. Here's where the buried treasure is. Here's how to win the game. Maps. Maps show where are things. Maps, of course, could be our Venn diagram showing the relationship of these three ideas in space. Coffee, sugar, and cream gives me the perfect cup of coffee. Geographic maps, Middle Earth. Schematic maps showing where pieces fit together. Mind maps showing the spatial relationships of different ideas. Look all different, but they're all doing the same thing because they're showing where are things in relation to each other. So when would we use a map in a presentation? Well, let's think about that. Whenever we wish to focus on the position of our characters or ideas relative to each other. So this person relative to this person. I'm going to put them into a map. Whenever we want to show where we are. Ladies and gentlemen, we're starting here and we're making a great journey here. Whenever we want to see the overlap between people or ideas. So what was the overlap between the right amount of sugar, coffee, and cream? Better show a map. And frankly, we use a map whenever we want to put a long list of things, items, or people into some more memorable context. Instead of just showing a list, why don't we create a little map that shows where each of those people or objects is actually located in relation to each other, and it becomes a whole lot more interesting than just a list. Let's go on. We're getting our way through. We're up to picture 4 now, the timelines. We looked at some of these timelines in the past. Timelines, simply the pictures that show the sequence of events. Hey, how do I use this fancy shampoo to wash my hair? Well, first I lather, I rinse, and I repeat, and now I have shiny, nice hair. A timeline that shows, in this case, a very lovely little timeline of a child's life. The day I was born, the day I went to Disneyland, and now I'm now 11 years old and in 6th grade. Timeline. Here's John Cleese from Monty Python showing us how to do a very silly walk. Here's some other people doing a not-so-silly walk. Looks like a visual timeline. And here's a timeline of how we actually edit together a series of stills in order to make a meaningful sequence. So those are timelines. Timelines, of course, we just lay things out in sequence. I have a series of milestones. Here's when they happen. Let me put them in sequence. When would I use a timeline in a presentation? Again, a very different type of picture than the other 3 that we'd seen so far. We use a timeline whenever we want to focus on the position of our characters, ideas, or events in time. So here's where this one was, and here's where this one was, and here's where this one was, not in space, not in north, but in time, in a position on a clock. Whenever we want to summarize a sequence, look, A, B, C, D, I put in a timeline. Whenever we want to show that time dependencies, there are dependencies between characters and their actions, well, let's use one of these swim lane timelines where we say here's character 1, 2, 3, 4, here is time, and here are the things that they're doing, and we can begin to see that wherever there's overlaps, there's dependencies, and things need to align up in sequential order. Or whenever we want to put a long list of events into broader context. So instead of just simply saying these things happened, well, let's go ahead and put them in a timeline and see if we can't make some visual sense out of the sequence of them. Only 2 more to go. Flowcharts. Flowcharts are getting a little more complicated now. Flowcharts are where we're actually mapping out cause and effect. We're trying to explain to our audience not just what happened, but how did it happen. So a simple flowchart might say, oh, my light doesn't work. Check to see if it's plugged in. If it's not plugged in, plug it in. If it was plugged in, maybe the bulb's burned out. Replace the bulb. Okay. Bing. I use my flowchart to understand how to make the light glow. Here's a funny one. Again, I saw at a bar outside of London several months ago. The sign sitting on the sidewalk said, hey, is everything okay? Yes. Well, come in and have a beer then. And if it is everything okay? No. Well, come in and have a beer then. Nice flowchart. Either way, it's going to end up with beer. Depending on your mood, That could be a nice place to end up. And why are they called flowcharts? Because any one of these things that maps the flow, we just stole it from Mother Nature. A flowchart, of course. Here's how a river flows. We might say this is a nice analogy for information or cause and effect or what have you. But basically we're just copying what Mother Nature already gave us. And that's why we call it a flowchart. So flowcharts, simple one. This happens, causes this. If nothing, returns to its original state. Flowchart. Hey, how does an assembly line work? I take these parts, combine them with these parts, put them together, move them down the line. How does the brain work? Information comes in here, gets processed, comes out here. Great. Hey, how does system thinking work? Some material flows into a reservoir and flows out on the other side. We measure that, we understand the mechanisms, we know how systems work. So when should we use one of these flowcharts? Because they, as you can see, these pictures are starting to get to be a little bit elaborate. We use a flowchart in a presentation whenever we want to clarify cause and effect. This is what happened and triggered that. Whenever we want to understand the influence of one character or object upon another, what's the influence of this one to this one? Whenever we want to see the flow of money or information, or influence, of course, what's the flow? Where's the money go? Follow the money path. It moves like this. Ah, now I understand. And whenever we want to illustrate why something broke, or how to fix it. This part of the assembly line's broken. Well, let's go back and look at the assembly line, see if we can't fix it. Which brings us to our last picture, the big one. We're going to call this the visual equation. Why? Because this is the picture that summarizes this. Depending on our presentation, we may begin with this one or we may end with this one. But this is the picture that actually is the big moral of the story, the big sort of takeaway. So a simple visual equation, Einstein tells us, E equals mc. What goes in here? Oh, how about if we square it? Here's a simple little visual equation. And someone's corrected me on this one. I actually had it wrong. It's not that a bird in hand is greater than 2 in the bush. A bird in hand is equal to 2 in the bush. So I messed up that equation already. Here's another little visual equation. Just simply says, this is hard, but this is easy. Here's a very simple little visual equation. Look, the same old thinking gives us the same old results, gives us the same old thinking, and around we go, which is why we are visual thinkers, because we're going to break that cycle and not think in the same old ways. Visual equations, let me show you a few more. A visual equation might be something we'd witness going to the park. Dogs love birds, but birds do not love dogs. That tells us how to behave if we have a dog at a park. A square plus change, that gives me something different. It gives me a circle. Hey, here's one, sad is not as good as happy. The full is greater than the sum of the parts. And here's my bird mix-up. I need to change that back to equal. Hey, okay, so these are interesting, but when do we use an equation? Whenever we wish to convey the single most important insight from our entire presentation. Of everything I've shown you, what do I want you to remember? That's when I'd show an equation. When we want to leave our audience with an indelible, unforgettable image of meaning. Again, we did all of this because we want to be happier. Whenever we find ourselves tempted to say, the moral of this story is something, we could just draw a picture to support that. And frankly, I often use a simple little visual equation at the end of a long presentation because very often it generates a bit of a laugh. Because people are saying, my gosh, for all the detail that we just went through, the thing we need to remember is, this is less than that. And when we see it in the end, often you get a nice release. People get happy. So those are our pictures. Let me put them quickly into example for you. Make this real for a moment. Imagine that someone was trying to explain something complicated. Like if we'd ask someone, can you explain the game of chess to me? Why, yes, I can, and I'm going to do it with just my 6 pictures. Picture number 1. Let's start with a portrait. So here's my portrait, and I say in chess. I'm just going to introduce who's involved. There are 2 teams. There's the black team and there's the white team, and they have these characters. There's a simple little portrait, getting things moving. Well, now let's make a chart that shows how come there aren't the same number of each of these pieces. Well, there are lots of pawns, but the value of the pawn to the game is very low. There's only 1 king and 1 queen, and the value to the game is very high. So now what I've done is I've quantified in a chart some of the pieces that are going to be playing in this game of chess. And then I say, okay, picture number 3. Let me draw you a map that shows where all these pieces sit at the beginning of the game. So here's the board, and here's the place where each one of those pieces starts. That's a map. And now let's go ahead and map out what happens in time. I'm the white player, so I move my first piece and I take your pawn. Well, you're the black player, so you move your knight and keep moving, and then eventually you take my pawn. And here we have a timeline that shows the series, the sequence of events that are taking place between our characters as they move across our map. That's our timeline. And we summarize it all with a flowchart that says, okay, capturing what happened, here's what happened. The characters began in these positions, they moved in the following ways, and we ended up with a win. Oh, how did it happen? It happened like this. Well, why did we even play? And now we end up with our visual equation, because the entire purpose of the game was to achieve victory, to have one king knock down the other. And there we have chess, a game that can be considered very, very complicated, very, very thoughtful, explained clearly in 6 simple pictures. Our portrait, our chart, our map, our timeline, our flowchart, and our equation. Those are our 6 pictures, and we tell any story with the same 6. Let me give you one quick example, and then I'll hand off your homework. This is a new idea that I've been working on the last couple of days regarding a new use of our 6x6 model. This is actually something I'm working on for Business Week magazine. They liked the picture and they said, could I help explain how business leaders, executives, the so-called C-suite, all of the C-level executives within an organization, is there a way to apply these pictures to them? And I said, why, yes, there is, because if you think about it, each executive has one type of information that they're most responsible for and one type of picture that they could draw to explain it. And if each executive could draw the right picture, we would get the whole picture. So the chief marketing officer is going to draw the portrait, the chief financial officer is going to draw the chart, the chief strategy officer is going to draw the map, the chief operations officer is going to draw the timeline, the chief technical officer is going to draw the flow chart, and the big boss, the chief executive officer, is going to draw the equation. Why? Well, look at this. How do we build the ultimate executive presentation? We assign each executive to draw their picture. I'm the CEO. Let me show you why we're doing what we're doing. Well, because this is better than this little mess. I draw you the equation. Hi, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer. Let me show you who are our customers and what we offer them. I will draw the portrait. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I'm the CFO. Let me show you how much money we have and how much we really expect to earn. Let me show you the chart. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer. Let me show you where we are now and where this company is going. To do that, I'm going to draw the map. I'm the Chief Operations Officer. Let me show you when we're taking each step along the way to execute on what everyone else has said. Here are the steps, 1, 2, and 3. That's the order we're going to take them in. I draw the timeline. And last in this list, I'm the Chief Technical Officer. I'm the one who's got to build the technology to support everything that they've just said. I'm going to draw you a flow chart to show the system diagram that's going to support that vision, that understanding of our customer and product, those numbers, that strategy, and that timeline. Wow. And when we're done, we have the ultimate executive presentation. The CEO gets up there and says, I'm going to walk you through what our business is doing. Here are our customers and our product. Here's the numbers. Here's where we are. Here's where we're going. Here's the sequence we're going to take. Here's the architecture we will use. And here is the big why. Because one integrated company is better than a bunch of small, disintegrated companies. And the audience says, I understand what you're doing. Awesome. That's how we use our 6 simple pictures in a presentation to tell our story. Time for a little bit of homework. Same as last time, since we're still focused on pictures, what I'd love you to do is tell a picture story. Find, photograph, or draw 3 to 10 pictures that tell a simple story without words. Put them into a slide deck Hey, thank you all for another great lesson. This is Dan signing off from the Napkin Academy, but don't go away. Now on our new platform, you can still submit your homework. Debbie, our community manager, is going to join you right now to show you exactly how to do that. And I really encourage you, do your homework. Okay, take it away, Debbie. See you soon.
We hope you enjoyed this Napkin Academy classic video. We've made it easier than ever to share your homework. After you've completed your homework and have a JPEG or PNG file saved on your computer, come back to this course. Once you're back here, scroll to the bottom of the screen, and in the comments box, you can add a comment. I'm just going to call this one My Homework. You can also add images by clicking on the Insert Edit Image button here. In the source box, click on the file. In the Images window, click on Upload, and then click on Add Files. This is going to take you to your computer where you can search for your images. I'm just going to search for mine in Pictures, and I'm going to choose this image here. You can also add multiple images here. Click Upload. After the upload is complete, click Close. Then scroll down, and you'll see that the last image is here, and it's checked. This is the one we just uploaded. Click Insert. I suggest in the dimensions box you change the maximum to 1200 pixels and leave the constrained proportions box checked. You can also add an image description here if you'd like. Click OK. You'll see that your image has been added to your comment. And now the last step, the most important one, make sure that you click the green comment button here to upload your homework to the Napkin Academy. We hope to see your homework soon.